For truth seekers, this video will be some commentary on the Abrego Garcia case. In the US, the politically left-leaning influencers are hyper-posting in unison condemnation of the Trump administration concerning the deportation of Mr. Garcia. Senator Chris Van Hollen, Democrat in Maryland, plans to travel to El Salvador to try to find the recently deported Garcia. My understanding is that these political commentators are using their chorus effect to create a narrative that sets Trump up for another impeachment. Much of the rhetoric against Trump regarding Garcia's deportation rests on the 9-0 Supreme Court ruling, allowing a lower court judge to impel Trump to in some way effectuate Garcia's return back to America. Here's an example of some of the rhetoric from Keith Olbermann.
Monday Countdown Podcast. Kristi Noem, the head of the Department of Homeland Security, and Tom Homan, the head of ICE, must be arrested immediately for contempt of court. They are defying court orders to return Mr. Abrego Garcia from captivity and torture in El Salvador. And they and Trump are on the verge of being in contempt of court of the Supreme Court, as Trump begins to indicate he will not abide by its ruling.
So from that monologue, a key point in the whole situation is Abrego's exact location, his exact disposition. And I believe essential to Trump's understanding of the matter is the word of his trusted advisor, Stephen Miller, who does have an X account where he says he was involved in both Trump administration. Given the broader context I've shared with you in a previous uploaded video concerning a military intelligence command working with the inner circle of Donald Trump in managing his agenda, I wonder if any association with Trump and others within the inner circle, such as Dan Scavino and maybe Peter Thiel. This potential context of associations is important in my determining Stephen's credibility and hope that he's not a turncoat or infiltrator. An important White House press conference was held with President Trump and El Salvador's President Bukele. Stephen Miller gives this impassioned response describing the White House's position on Garcia's return to U.S. by court order.
Was it 9-0?
Yes, it was a 9-0
In our favor.
in our favor against the district court ruling, saying that no district court has the power to compel the foreign policy function of the United States. As Pam said, the ruling solely stated that if this individual, at El Salvador's sole discretion, was sent back to our country, that we could deport him a second time. No version of this legally ends up with him ever living here because he is a citizen of El Salvador. That is the president of El Salvador. Your questions about it per the court can only...
After this exchange, President Bukele weighs in and basically says that he cannot deport Garcia back to the United States because it would be like kidnapping. But again, central to the matter that we're discussing is not just Stephen Miller's credibility, but the exact location of Garcia. Is he free in El Salvador or is he in prison? If he's in prison, why is he in prison? This is a question to be addressed in this video. I ask Rock, where can I find the Supreme Court order for the U.S. to facilitate the return of Mr. Garcia for El Salvador? The Supreme Court order regarding the facilitation of Kilmer Abrego Garcia's return from El Salvador can be found in the official U.S. Supreme Court website. I did search here and could not immediately find it under the Orders and Opinions section. Alternatively, databases like SCOTUS blog, I did check here, did find something, have reportedly included links to the document. Next question. I assume the order is this, which has statement by Justice Sotomayor, and I linked to the Supreme Court order I found on the internet. I see mentioned online that 9 justices were in agreement. Do you know where I can find evidence of the 9 justices ruling on a matter? And so upon asking that, I get the reply. You're correct, the Supreme Court order related to Garcia is likely the one you linked. It's a per curiam opinion from April 10th, 2025, which includes a statement by Justice Sotomayor. This unsigned opinion indicates the court's unanimous decision, as per curiam opinions typically reflect agreement among all participating justices unless dissents or concurrences are noted. Here, no dissents are listed, and Justice Sotomayor's statement is in concurrent, not a dissent, suggesting all 9 justices agreed on the outcome. So here's an article on SCOTUS blog by Amy Howe. Her political affiliation is unknown to me, titled Justice Direct Government to Facilitate Return of Maryland Man Mistakenly Deported to El Salvador. I guess because they describe him as a Maryland man, that might give you a sense of her leaning. Supreme Court Thursday evening largely left in place an order by a federal judge in Maryland directing the government to return to the United States a Maryland man who is currently being held in a maximum security prison in El Salvador as a result of what Trump administration concedes was an administrative error. In an unsigned opinion without any recorded dissent, the court turned down the Trump administration's request to block the ruling by U.S. District Judge Paula Zenas, which Chief Judge John Roberts had temporarily paused on Monday afternoon to give two justices time to consider the government's request. The justices agreed that Zenas could require the Trump administration to facilitate Garcia's release from custody in El Salvador and to ensure that his case is handled as it would have been had not temporarily sent to that country. But the justices sent the case back to the lower court for Zenas to clarify her additional instruction that Trump administration effectuate his return. I think this portion here about the justices telling the Trump administration to communicate with Zenas on how the return is to be effectuated, that might be what Stephen Miller is describing as the victory. In making that clarification, the justice wrote Zenas should take note of the differences owed to the executive branch in conduct of foreign affairs. On the other hand, they added the Trump administration should be prepared to share what it can concerning the steps it has taken. The man at the center of the case is 29-year-old Garcia, who was born in El Salvador and came to the U.S. as an undocumented immigrant as a teenager to escape gang violence in his home country. So you get a sense that the timeline of his arrival, given his age being 29, was probably over 10 years prior. Since 2019, he has lived outside Washington, D.C. with his wife, a U.S. citizen, and their 3 children, all who are also U.S. citizens due to birthright citizenship. In 2019, immigrant officials began efforts to deport Garcia when he sought to be released from immigration custody with a bond. The government contended that he was a member of MS-13. An immigration judge denied Garcia's request for release, finding that evidence shows he is a verified member of MS-13. Although the judge acknowledged that she was reluctant to give evidentiary weight to Garcia's clothing as an indication of gang affiliation, she concluded that it was enough that a past proven and reliable source information had verified Abrego Garcia's gang affiliation, gang rank, and gang name. The Board of Immigration Appeals affirmed that ruling. Several months later, Garcia was eventually granted withholding of removal, which is a form of immigration relief that protects him from being deported to El Salvador. So this is the key fact of the left. They're saying he has legal status because he has this withholding of removal. In particular, an immigration judge concluded Garcia has shown that gang members in El Salvador continue to threaten and harass his family, and authorities in that country were unwilling to protect him from his past feared future persecution by the gangs. March 2025, ICE officers took Garcia into custody. He was sent to Texas, and then March 24, he was taken to El Salvador's Terrorism Confinement Center. Regarding the El Salvador prison, this is an example of what we're dealing with here.
Next, we will enter an isolation cell, which is where prisoners are sent when they commit an infraction. The only light entrance is a hole in the ceiling. How many people did you kill?
I do not remember.
How many were there?
We have committed different crimes at different times.
Absolutely everything is done in here, from going to the bathroom to cleaning up. Everything is done in here open. This group behind me alone is very possibly responsible directly or indirectly for more than 200 homicides.
So, Judge Zenas ordered the federal government to return Garcia by a certain time, 11:59 p.m. Monday, April 7th. So a very short turnaround. Both Zenas and the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit declined to pause the return order while the government appealed. In a concurring opinion joined by Judge Robert King, Judge Stephanie Thacker wrote that the federal government has no legal authority to snatch a person who is lawfully present in the United States off the street and remove him from the country without due process. The government's contention otherwise and its argument that federal courts are powerless to intervene, she concluded, are unconscionable. President Trump's new Solicitor General, John Sauer, came to the Supreme Court Monday without even waiting for the Fourth Circuit to act on his request to pause the return order. He contended that Zenas had ordered unprecedented relief dictating that the United States that it must not only negotiate with a foreign country to return an enemy alien on foreign soil, but also cede by a certain time, that being 11:59 that night. Sewell reiterated the Trump administration's complaints about what he characterized as a deluge of unlawful injunctions by federal judges around the country. But even compared to those orders, he argued Zenas' order is remarkable, and he asked the justices to impose an administrative stay that is a temporary freeze on Zenas' order to give court time to consider Trump administration's request. Shortly before 4 p.m. on Monday, Roberts granted administrative stay. A few minutes later, Garcia's lawyers submitted their response. They urged justice to deny Trump administration's request and ordered the government to facilitate Abrego's immediate return to halt the ongoing irreparable harm he suffers and advance the public's interest in the proper administration of justice. Garcia's lawyers stressed that their client has never been charged with a crime in any country. This is the most important part to me, in my understanding, is if it's true Garcia had not been charged with any crime besides, of course, illegal immigration. Because if it is the case that he is being deported because of the illegal immigration status and because of the suspected association with MS-13, with MS-13 being designated a terrorist organization, you still need a crime, not just a mere affiliation, to go to a maximum security prison in another country. So if Garcia was sent not to prison, but just deported simply, that's an entirely different context than being sent to a prison for a crime. So this is like the major point that's not really being communicated in the debates you see online. For instance, yesterday, Town Hall Charity thread, Stephen Miller just deconstructed the entire media narrative surrounding the deported MS-13 gang member. Here's how he completely turned the tables on these reporters.
Well, as an example, there are thousands of either trained Nicaragua members left in this country or their affiliates and associates. So obviously some portion of those will be going to El Salvador as part of our effort to eradicate this foreign terrorist organization from the United States.
So the key is linking Mr. Garcia to Trinidad de Agua, or MS-13, as these are considered terrorist organizations by the United States. But in his commentary, he doesn't really emphasize that disposition of going to the free soil, just being deported from the United States, versus going to jail and ensuring that anyone who is being deported to go to jail has been properly prosecuted for that to be the case. Here in this clip, Miller talks about the sovereignty of El Salvador and that the United States doesn't have the right to kidnap citizens from their country to take back. But still, this is the concept of where he's ultimately going. So is he getting deported just to El Salvador, or is he getting deported to a prison or jail in El Salvador? More to my point, listen carefully to how he worded this about no one being mistakenly deported.
The beginning, because nobody was mistakenly deported anywhere. That's like the big fact that most of you have gotten wrong. No one was mistakenly sent anywhere. The only mistake that was made is a lawyer put an incorrect line in a legal filing, and they've since been relieved of duty. He is El Salvadorian. He is an illegal alien. He was deported to El Salvador. I would welcome anyone here to tell me what country they think we should be sending El Salvadorian illegal aliens to.
Okay. Yeah, so on the surface, it is correct. If a person's El Salvadorian, if they came to our country illegally, and even if they started a family and a new administration comes in and decides to get rid of people who entered illegally, he can be deported. However, it's the specific situation of his MS-13 alleged affiliation and then him being deported to prison for that. I think that's like what the left is taking, because they see it's like a opportunity, and Miller is not communicating in that nuance. He's just talking about whether or not someone should be in the country or not in the country. Later in this interview, we get to the question of how do you know he's a member of MS-13? Very important question. So we'll see his response.
According to our government and his government. In other words, his government has confirmed based on their own intelligence that he's a member of MS-13. First of all, do you dispute that he's an illegal alien? Do you dispute that he's an illegal alien? Okay. And do you dispute that as an illegal alien, you have the right to deport him? And he went through the legal process. So I want to be what I'm getting from this conversation, which is educational for me, is that not one person in the media knows the difference between a deportation order and a withholding order. Is that a fair statement? You're learning about this all for the first time right now? I guess so. Okay.
So he goes back to the statement that because he's illegal, he can be deported. And he adds that the El Salvador government has confirmed his affiliation with MS-13. So this would be the important piece of information to get to the public to quell the chorus that's being produced by the left. You have to show that evidence that indeed Garcia was a member of MS-13. If you don't, it's going to be looked at as a weakness that will then hurt Trump politically, as the chorus uses the chorus effect to induce the mind control reaction. There is a question of how accurately Amy Howe characterizes the situation. She's clearly from academia, having a law degree from Georgetown University and being a graduate of University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, holding a master's degree in Arab studies. So I asked Grok an important question. But in looking at Grok's response, you also have to keep in mind that the AI is quite biased due to the information it's trained on being mostly mainstream media publications. Just keep that in mind. Can you describe any existing evidence pointing to the history of Mr. Garcia's alleged MS-13 gang affiliation? The allegations of Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia's affiliation with MS-13 stem primarily from 2019 immigration proceeding, but evidence presented has been heavily contested and lacks corroboration. Here's a breakdown of the existing claims and their basis, drawing from available sources. There was a 2019 arrest and informant claim. March 2019, Garcia was arrested by Prince George's County, Maryland police in a Home Depot parking lot while seeking day labor. One of the 3 other men detained claimed Garcia was an MS-13 member. So imagine being turned on your applicant or coworker in that way. It's so sad, even if it's a lie. This informant alleged he belonged to MS-13 clique in Long Island, New York, despite Garcia never having lived there. Local police reportedly found information unreliable and did not verify it, and no charges were filed. The officer who documented the allegation was later suspended, further undermining the credibility. During the 2019 bond proceedings, ICE alleged Garcia was a certified gang member based on the informant's tip and circumstantial details, such as his clothing, including a Chicago Bulls cap and hoodie, which they claimed was associated with MS-13. However, no concrete evidence, like criminal convictions, gang tattoos, or documented gang activity, were presented. ICE's reliance on the informant's unverified statement was noted in court filings, but an immigration judge, while granting withholding of removal, referenced a gang affiliation without requiring further proof for bond denial purposes. The immigration judge in 2019 denied Garcia's bond, citing government's claim of MS-13 membership as indicating he was a danger to the community. The judge relied on ICE submission of a gang worksheet from Prince George County's police, which repeated the informant's claim. However, the same judge granted withholding of removal, finding Garcia faced a credible threat of persecution from gangs, notably Barrio 18 in El Salvador, suggesting that he was a target, not a member. No evidence was introduced to substantiate MS-13 claim. The judge's bond ruling did not equate to definitive finding of gang membership. So this is key. If this is accurate and not totally biased, it means that there's a weak case to send Garcia to the terrorism confinement center in El Salvador. I asked Grok an obvious question. Do you know where I can find a record of the 2019 immigration bond proceedings? Important to look at those direct documents to see what evidence was used to tie him to MS-13. The reply: finding a specific record of Garcia's immigration bond proceeding can be challenging due to limited public access to immigration court records and the informal nature of bond hearing. Below is a detailed guide on where and how you might locate such records. So it goes on to say, consider filing a FOIA to get the information. So this is very key to stopping what we're seeing. If these types of issues aren't curtailed at the head, they're used as ammunition to try to change things politically. It's important that we don't trust individuals blindly, but that we verify that they're working using the strongest ethics and considering everything carefully in their actions. That includes Trump as well. In this discussion, I'm not in any way suggesting that Miller is a saboteur of Trump's administration, but I have to ask the question of true allegiance because of the nature of what Trump's trying to do and the strength and intensity of the many powers that are armed against him by the evil one. My account is tiny, my voice is small, but I ask if you get something from what I'm describing to you, please share this video with those accounts with a much larger voice to get them to make statements to ensure that Trump's resisting forces know the appropriate flank to attack. Thank you.